I think making a roast makes you feel like a grown-up. Do you agree? I think it makes you feel like a grown-up. Pot roast is usually thought of as a beef pot roast. In this case, we are doing a pork pot roast, which I think is a great variation when you want that comforting meal. And we're starting with a beautiful pork roast in front of us. But first, we want to think of the spices and the flavor we want to add. So right in front of me here, I have, to me, the best combination for pork. We have some dried onion, some dried garlic, some black pepper, and then dried rosemary and thyme. Now, when I put a rub on a meat, I like to use dried herbs. When I put them in other applications, I like them fresh, and we're gonna use both today, which I really like. To this though, we need to add salt, because salt is meat's best friend. It's what's gonna actually bring out the flavor. It's also going to ensure that it retains its moisture, which is what you want. So we wanna mix all these together, which is really simple. To me, a good roast, there's nothing like it. Whether it's a Sunday meal, we always had a roast if we were gonna have one on a Sunday noon. If it wasn't meatloaf, it was probably some version of a roast. And this is one of my favorites because it's so simple. So here in front of me, you can do a shoulder or a butt, which is really, both of those are great cuts to do a roast because they can take that long, slow heat where their fat marbling melts and becomes tender and just wants to fall apart. This one you can see does have a larger fat cap on the side of it. Not a big deal. If you want, you can trim a little bit off of that. I like to make sure it maintains some of that fat. I don't ever like to remove all the fat because what is fat? Fat is flavor. That's why we roast with olive oil, because it adds flavor to things. And that's why in this case, this meat is gonna be so good because it has some fat on it. So we're gonna just a little bit of the excess here on the side, I'm gonna remove. And then I have my roast right here. What I'm gonna do to it is take this salt rub, and we are gonna use all of it. We are gonna douse all the sides, everything in this rub. And you wanna make sure you use all of this rub. That's gonna make sure it has a lot of flavor, and that's what you want. Now, I am using a boneless roast because it's just easier later to, be able to cut. You can use a bone-in. If you use a bone-in, most likely you will not need to truss it. I'm not trussing it really, I'm just putting a couple ties around it because what this is gonna do is just make sure it kind of stays together and holds shape. When it's a boneless one, it means the bone was cut out, so it has usually a little opening in it. Now, whenever I'm doing that, use butcher's twine. You want something that is just 100%, cotton. You don't want it to be anything synthetic. But what I am doing here, if you notice, is when I tie it, this is a butcher's knot. You wanna go once over, twice over and under, and then pull that because that's gonna hold, see how it holds there until you make your double knot. It's just kind of a little quick tip that I personally find super helpful to hold that knot. So we're gonna just cut the ends off. And what I have on the stove right now, I have a little bit of oil heating, so I'm gonna wash my hands. We're gonna brown this, that adds flavor. You want a crust on it. I have my oil heating, and that's an essential step. Make sure you use enough oil and make sure you preheat it. You want it hot because when you add this, that's what's gonna create the sear and that Maillard reaction where you get the browning. So we're gonna take this roast, see how beautiful this is? Do you hear that? When you set it in, you get a little bit of sizzle. Now, it's not gonna fully cook, so we can set it back on this plate before it goes in for its long roast. But what I really just wanna do during these steps is make sure it gets a nice crust on. You can do all sides of it, you can do just two sides of it. The more you do, the more flavor it's gonna have, because once it's in the oven, it's not gonna form that crust. So we're adding the flavor now, building the flavor, and then we're just gonna let it fall apart and get melty in the stove. So what we're doing here, on all the sides, we have been browning it, and it is looking nice and getting a good crust on it. And that crust means we're also developing a layer of flavor on the bottom of the pan, the fond. So as I remove this roast, which smells wonderful, sounds wonderful, I'm gonna turn down the heat just a little bit. Remember, it's not fully cooked, so I'm putting it back on this plate. We'll put it back in here later. I'm gonna add some white wine. White wine adds a little bit of acidity, but it also is going to help us just a little bit deglaze the bottom of this pan. We're gonna take a little spatula here and we're gonna work up all those brown bits that are on the bottom. And what that does is it brings them up and it kind of just gives us this new base of flavor. So you can see I'm just going around, scratching off most of the brown bits, nothing perfect, but that wine also adds acidity, which is a nice balance. So just about another minute here for most of that wine to evaporate, and then we can kind of put the whole roast together. So this has cooked enough to cook most of the wine off. You know, there's some of that residual oil and the juices from the meat. So we're gonna set it here, and you can see that what's beautiful about this, most of that fond on the bottom has now worked up into that just beginning cooking liquid, which I really like. So to that, we're gonna add a little bit of stock. I'm doing a little bit of chicken stock. And what this is gonna do is just give just enough of that flavor and enough liquid to make sure it has a good environment to roast in. We can add now this browned roast. I mean, look at that. You can hear the crust on it. That's what I love about it. And you get that beautiful browning all over, so it's gonna look so pretty when it comes out. So any juices also, not too many came out, which is wonderful. But if they do, make sure to put those back in because they're gonna be flavor. You don't wanna leave the juices. They're a really good flavor. So we're gonna put shallots now in this. Now you could use onion. What I like about shallot is it has a lighter flavor. I grow all my shallots, and I will admit, when I buy them in the grocery store, they're usually bigger because they're the French gray variety. I did not grow the French gray variety. I grew Dutch red, and so they're very small. So I'm using, you know, almost 3 shallots to usually where I would put 1 of the larger one in. So I have peeled them, and I'm gonna put them all around, but you can see what I started with, pretty small shallots. If they're the grocery store shallots that are bigger, you add just a few in. I just think shallots really do they change the flavor of this, which I really like. Now I also wanna do some garlic. I do grow my own garlic too. Now these, on the other hand, are almost the same size as my shallots because it's such a beautiful heirloom garlic, which really does make a difference. Now all I'm gonna do on these is smash them a little bit because smashing them helps that peel to come off. And I don't need to mince these. They are really gonna, you know, have you ever roasted garlic? If you ever do, you know it just kind of becomes soft and you can actually spread it with a knife. If you haven't done that, do it. But that's what happens really in this roast too. So there's no reason to break these down any further than just smashing them a little bit to get the peel off easily and throwing them right in the pot. So now we have a beautiful roast. This doesn't look like a lot yet, and that's because we are gonna add the traditional, a pot roast usually has what? Potatoes and carrots. My mom's favorite was the carrots. But if you put those in now, they're just gonna get mushy. They're gonna lose all their flavor. We're gonna put those in towards the end of roasting so we can actually maintain their texture and flavor. Cover it, put it in the oven, low and slow. You're gonna be the king of roasts here soon. The roast has been cooking, roasting, and you know, really, it's just part done because what we wanna do now is add everything else to it. So you can see it gets really soft and melty inside. So the garlic, the shallots, look how they just melt into some of that residual oil. I love that. And it smells really good. And as we're getting close to done, we're thinking, let's have some vegetables. Let's make a pot meal out of this. That's a pot roast, right? So we're gonna grab some potatoes. We're gonna grab a couple herbs. I like to do some thyme and some rosemary where you're using them dried as a rub, but then fresh also brings in that flavor. And then of course some carrots. So when I'm going to do it, I am using yellow potatoes. I think they hold up well, but you could do russets also. It kind of just depends what you have on hand. And what I'm gonna do is just make them into semi-bite size, but I would say maybe on the larger size pieces, because what I like is then when you go to serve them, they maintain that size. But since they're not getting like really overall too long of baking time now, they're gonna really just go in just enough to get them done. Now I'm scrubbing, so I don't know if you're with me on this. I am a believer in scrubbing a potato, absolutely. And if there's bad abrasions on it, or if it doesn't look good, peel it, that's great. If not, I like the peel because to me it has nutrients in it, it's part of the potato. I see no reason to go through and just peel the thing if you don't have to. So I don't. For the carrots, I'm really doing just kind of a nice big chunk. You know, carrots can be all shapes and sizes, so you can adjust. Like, do you see how the ends get really small? If you think they're too small, you can just eat them as fresh carrots. I like to do them at a slight angle, but then keep the pieces rather big because again, we don't want mushy carrots. And yes, you're seeing a theme here. I don't like to peel anything if I don't have to. These are good carrots. I have scrubbed them. I don't mind that peel on because I think, you know what? There's nutrients in it. Why waste any part of the carrot? Now, if there's bad spots, yeah, peel it. That's just what you do. You know, everything can just go back in the pot, and that's what's beautiful about a pot roast. I really think it's one of the first one-pot meals. And you know what? All that residual kind of oil that was from the actual, or fat that was from the roast itself, think about that. That's what's gonna roast these potatoes and these carrots. And if we would have added them in the beginning, they would have gotten way too mushy. And you don't want that. No one wants that. We're also gonna put in some rosemary and some thyme. Remember, like I said that? Leave it whole. It can fall apart in the oven, which is often what happens, and that's what I like. Now, one last thing would say, I would always season, you know, these did not get any of the seasoning that the meat did. So we're just gonna go around with a little bit of salt, make sure it gets on some of those, a little bit of cracked black pepper, and then this is going right back into the oven, just so those potatoes get tender. That meat is gonna finish roasting, it's gonna become fall apart tender, and we're ready for a great meal together. Friends, the time has come. Are you hungry? I'm hungry. So this has roasted, it has fully baked. Now in the end, if you want to, you of course can always remove the meat, put the broiler on if you want to brown the potatoes. Personally, I love them like this. This is to me the most homey, nostalgic thing. What I like is it's a different recipe than a beef pot roast. This has different flavors, different consistencies. Now what I will always do is go in and remember those 2 strings we put on? You can just cut, you could leave them on, but you also could remove them. That way there's no surprise for anyone. And yeah, it's really hot, so you should watch your fingers. I've burned them enough times, they don't even notice. And this is where you could take it out, serve it on a platter. Personally, I like to usually keep it in here, and if you notice, let's just go in and look here. It just falls apart, look at this. You can just shred it, you could slice it obviously, see how beautiful that is? This is the best part of a good pot roast. What I love is there's some pan juices in the bottom with some of that oil. So this is really where you can do whatever you want to serve it up. You can just take some out, obviously, take some pieces out. I'm going to get in there and just get some of my best and favorite parts. I love the end pieces. And also, let's be honest, look at these potatoes. They are browned, they are beautiful, they're creamy. So when you want to know when they're done, put your knife into the center of them. They should be creamy. But do you notice how they're holding their shape? That's because they weren't in there that whole time. No, instead they were in there just enough. And the carrots are holding their shape. This is a meal, you guys, and it's a delicious one, and it's one I'm personally very excited. See how that just fell apart? Like we could just take a moment where I awkwardly eat everything. So, let's talk about the essentials here. This meat is full of flavor, first and foremost. 2, it's not dried out at all. That rub we put on it helped it not only have flavor, but retain moisture, and then the way we cooked it helped it all just kind of sit in its own juices and retain all that. The potatoes, look at that. They're just perfectly cooked. Creamy, beautiful. Carrots. I love cooked carrots. And they retain all the texture and flavor you want. They taste like a carrot still. So what is the key here? It's simple. We add flavor in the beginning with our spices, with our rub, with our salt. We brown it to have that crust and that overall fond created. We add a little bit of acidity with that wine that cooks off, a little bit of stock to start the cooking liquid. We roast the meat for a long time to really get it to the point where we need it. Then we add the vegetables so they just cook enough. And in the end, what we have is a perfect pork pot roast. That's right, it's here. So what I want you to do is share this video around so other people can see good food is doable to make at home, whether it's a Sunday special occasion, whether it's a weekend, or hey, you want to treat yourself during the week, this is for you. Get this full recipe in the description of the video. Check my website, wyseguide.com, for a printable version and every other recipe. And until then, make something delicious and good, just like this pot roast, and I think you'll be pretty happy.